While we have a wide range of books we call sci-fi, the range of realism can vary hugely. Some stories could take place in our time, while others take place thousands of years in the future. So today we're ranking science fiction realism from level 1 to level 10, going from lightly tweaked version of our world all the way to cosmic horror, quantum consciousness, and post-human thought experiments. And what you will see is that as we progress further and further into the future, sci-fi will start looking much more like fantasy. So let's begin with level 1, barely sci-fi.
You ready?
Ready!
So this is the sci-fi that barely feels like sci-fi. The world looks like ours, the people act like us, and the problems, they're just 1 or 2 scientific breakthroughs away. So level 1 sci-fi is set in the present or very near present, but with a single twist. Maybe there's a hyper-intelligent AI assistant, or memory implants, or ways to travel to Mars relatively safely. And that is what makes it so compelling. It doesn't take place in a galaxy far, far away. Rather, it takes place maybe only 5 years from now in a world that still runs on, smartphones, social media, and a lot of student debt. So a perfect example would be The Martian by Andy Weir. In the story, Mark Watney isn't flying a spaceship through wormholes or using laser swords. He's just a man stranded on Mars and trying to save a life with, potatoes, duct tape, and basic chemistry. Every challenge he faces is solved with real engineering, real physics, and obviously a lot of real swearing.
F word in gerund form, F word again is wrong with you.
The only thing that is futuristic about The Martian is that we've gotten slightly better at space travel. Everything else is, pure NASA problem solving. Or another example could be Gravity, which is very much a sci-fi story set in our present. In the story, again, there are no aliens or wormholes or crazy AIs. It's just one astronaut drifting through space, relying on Newtonian physics and sheer determination to make it home. But what happens when sci-fi starts speculating what our world will look like in a couple of decades? Welcome to level 2, Fractured Modernity. So this is where science fiction stops whispering and starts getting a little too real. So level 2 is all about technology that could exist within the next 10 to 30 years, and how that tech starts to reshape society in a lot of uncomfortable, subtle, and often deeply personal ways. A perfect example could be Severance, which is definitely one of the best TV shows I have ever seen, which realistically could take place within a decade. In this world, a biotech company has developed a procedure that splits your consciousness in 2. One version of you exists only at work, and the other one only outside of work. And the weird thing is that neither knows what the other one does. There's no memory crossover, just a clean mental firewall. And on paper, it sounds great, because you get pure work-life balance, no stress at home during meetings, and no emails invading your weekend. You just clock in and blank out, and then you clock out. But the catch here is that the you at work never leaves. So this new identity never gets weekends. They don't get hobbies. They don't even know what the outside world looks like. To them, work is all there is. I mean, this show is so crazy and it's so brilliant. But what then happens when sci-fi starts to look 30 plus years into the future? Well, let's move on to level 3, plausible near future systems. If you work from home like I do, and you're running a YouTube channel, managing scripts, editing, meetings, and so on, then let me introduce you to something that has genuinely changed how I work every day. The FlexiSpot E7 Pro standing desk that's right behind me. After long editing sessions, I'd end the day with a sore back and really tight shoulders, and I know I'm not alone. The thing is, sitting all day isn't just uncomfortable, it's actually really bad for you. Now, the E7 Pro encourages movement throughout the day, helping with circulation, posture, and overall energy. Whether I'm scripting a video, answering emails, or filming B-roll, I can quickly switch between sitting and standing with just one button. This table is also insanely stable. You can see me here working and even lifting the table, and you can see that the water in the cup never moves. It's totally still. And I need to showcase the craziest thing about this desk. So this desk has a 440-pound weight capacity and got a height range from 25 to 50 inches. Literally, my whole body was on the desk, and its dual motor system had no problem lifting me all the way up, and throughout it all, it was totally stable when fully raised. This desk both feels and looks like a premium product, and even has a 15-year warranty and a 30-day risk-free return, which is kinda unheard of. So if you're thinking about upgrading your home setup, especially as a creator or someone that works from home, the FlexiSpot E7 Pro is honestly the most versatile and durable desk I've ever used. At the moment, FlexiSpot is having a mega sale now, a happy Independence Day sale, so you can get up to 65% off, and you guys also have the chance to get a free order. I'll leave a link in the description down below.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
So this is the level where humanity has started to conquer space, but we're still playing by the rules of physics as we know them. At level 3, the timeline has jumped forward between 30 to 50 years, but the world still feels grounded. So for example, we might have colonized the moon, or we built bases on Mars, we might be mining asteroids and sending research ships to the outer planets, but there's no, faster than light travel, there's no alien civilizations, just Earth stretched thin across the solar system. So an example here could be Artemis by Andy Weir. It's set on the first city on the moon, which is the closest place we can settle outside of Earth, and living there is not treated as a futuristic utopia, but rather a gritty, low-gravity outpost where oxygen tanks are absolutely vital. Or we could look at 2001: A Space Odyssey, which showcases a future where space travel has become a routine, and you can grab a commercial flight to orbit or the moon, for example, and again with a focus on realistic physics. And really, there's nothing fantastical about these stories. But what does sci-fi look like when we jump even further into the future? Let's move on to level 4, structured but accessible futures.
Well, we got this far in our brains, farther than any human in history.
Well, not far enough.
At level 4, the stories are now taking place between 50 to 100 years in the future, and in these stories, science has taken considerable steps forward, and the author of such stories are forced to speculate about how technology will progress. But these stories are still relatively grounded, as there usually will be a significant focus on the scientific method, the need for fuel, for example, maths, and definitely a lot of science. So let's start with an example here. We could look at Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which takes place around the year 2080. I mean, we're actually never fully told when the story takes place, but that's a rough estimate. So the story follows a lone astronaut who wakes up in a distant star system with no memory and a mission to save Earth from an extinction level event. But the catch here, every solution has to follow real physics. From using centrifuge for artificial gravity to figuring out how alien biology works. Oh man, I love this book so much because it's just a pure, satisfying science fiction problem-solving kind of story. But another example could be, for example, Interstellar, which takes place around the year 2060 to 2090. Again, we're not fully told when the story takes place, but while Interstellar plays around with some pretty crazy scientific concept, it's still one of the most grounded depictions of space travel in film. Again, we have stuff like black holes, time dilation, relativity, all modeled using actual equations provided by the physicist Kip Thorne. And the drama hits harder because the science is real, and the movie also is just amazing. I love that movie so much. But what then happens when science doesn't just shape the world around us, but it starts having impact on the wider universe? Let's move on to level 5, civilization simulations.
Democracy. Our way of life.
Oh, hello.
But freedom doesn't come free.
No! Sweet liberty! No!
So level 5 will often explore how entire societies evolve in response to new science, ideologies, or catastrophic change. The stories aren't just about what the future will look like, but also about how people think, behave, and organize themselves in it. So an example could be Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, which starts approximately in the year 2135. Again, just an estimate. And on the surface, it's a story about a child trained to save humanity from an alien threat. But underneath it, it's about an entire civilization restructured around militarism, surveillance, and psychological manipulation. In the story, children are tested, ranked, and broken. because that's what the system demands. And when you read the story, the world feels alien, not because of the technology, but because of the values and how the science has evolved over time. So at level 5, the tech is still really important, but what matters more is how it has reshaped society and how people adapt or don't. So at this level, the stories will often focus on ideological evolution over a long period of time and how humans have ended up having a total new way of thinking about society due to the development of a lot of technology. But what happens when stories jump even further into the future? Well, welcome to level 6, hard science fiction. Now, a lot of sci-fi stories actually don't stay stuck on one level, but will often evolve and move up the scale as the story progresses. And that is certainly true for the example I will use for level 6, The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. The first book begins in a world that feels close to ours. You know, physicists, political secrecy, and there's a lot of like mysterious suicides. But slowly the story pulls us into something much bigger. We have stuff like quantum entanglement, advanced computation, and our first contact with an alien civilization. And it does it all while sticking to the rules of science. So you could actually make an argument that the three-body problem shouldn't be at level 6 but closer to level 4 or 5, but I'm including it here because I'm currently reading The Dark Forest, which is the second book in the trilogy, and that fits perfectly into this level as it takes place around 150 to 200 years in the future. Okay, so very minor spoilers for the three-body problem, but I'm only really spoiling the introduction of the first book. And you could probably even read the blurb and see what I'm talking about here, so I'm just gonna give you brief spoilers. In this novel, Earth begins preparing for an alien invasion that won't arrive for 400 years. So at this level, we are now truly moving into uncharted waters, where the story might feel realistic, but there's also considerable speculation going on here. And you might have noticed that we're now slowly moving into territory where you could actually make an argument that fantasy is slowly creeping into the stories, as some could argue that intelligent alien life, as we see in the three-body problem, is actually closer to fantasy than reality. At least for now. But what happens when we move even further into the future? Well, let's move on to the next level where you'll see the line between fantasy and sci-fi is starting to slowly blur. Welcome to level 7, humanity is changing.
I'm not you. I'm not gonna live like you. I'm gonna kill you.
So this is where science fiction often gets weird, in the best possible ways. At level 7, the stories will usually have some wild ideas how humanity and our understanding of space will develop. So these are stories with often post-human protagonists, digital minds, and also altered consciousness, and will often take place anywhere from year to 2300 all the way up to the year 3000. So one great example is Mickey 7 by Edward Ashton, which probably takes place somewhere around the year 2500. Now Mickey is a disposable employee on a distant space colony, and every time he dies, they just print a new body and upload his memories. So this story is a humorous story that radically changes our perception of consciousness and where humanity will be in the future. And before you ask, I actually have not seen the movie, but I read the book and I also really enjoyed the follow-up Antimatter Blues. Both books that I feel are very reminiscent of Andy Weir, so I would recommend it if you like those types of stories. But yeah, we're now at a level where some of the stories just feel so wacky that they are very reminiscent of some fantastical stories. But what happens when we move even further into the future? Well, let's move on to level 8, Alien Logic. So this is where science fiction goes fully off the map. The characters might still be human, but the world no longer is. At this level, alien intelligence doesn't just look different, it thinks in ways we can't even begin to understand. So a perfect example would be Children of Time and also the sequel Children of Ruin by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which takes place thousands of years in the future. In these books, we follow the rise of spider civilizations, octopus hive minds, and long-dead AI systems trying to communicate across species, planets, and eons. The aliens don't speak English, and they don't dream of conquest, but they evolve, remember, and reason so differently from human beings. And the more you read, the more you realize this story isn't about us at all. Because at level 8, humanity often isn't even the hero and occasionally isn't even the focus point. Sometimes we're just seen as noise in the background in a huge universe, and here physics might also behave differently. Communication might rely on chemical pulses, memory sharing, or even manipulated gravity fields. So these stories will often be fully or partially built on non-human perspectives and logic, and language and morality will also look very, very alien. And at this level, stories often focus on how other creatures might understand consciousness and reality different than human beings. Which is the reason why this is a level 8 science fiction story, since a human author has to speculate how a non-human would understand these things. So in a lot of ways, the creatures we follow in A Children of Time and Children of Ruin could be seen as fantastical, as they're totally made up by the author, and the author really has to speculate how they will think about these things. But what happens when we jump 8 to 10,000 years into the future? Well, welcome to level 9, the sci-fi fantasy blend.
What's in the box?
Pain.
So this is where science fiction begins to look a lot like fantasy. Some could even make an argument that these stories are just as much fantasy as science fiction. At this level, the stories are set so far in the future, or are so deeply transformed by speculative ideas, that the line between science fiction and myth and fantasy really begins to blur. The technology is still there, but it's wrapped in, prophecy and belief, and the world will feel really ancient, even though they're built on the remnants of crazy technology. So the best example here is without a doubt Dune by Frank Herbert. So Dune isn't just about spice and sandworms and technology, but it's also about power, faith, and the dangerous intersection of politics and religion. So while this is very much a sci-fi story, it has a lot of things that is reminiscent of fantasy. For example, we follow Paul, who doesn't just lead a revolution, but he becomes this messianic figure trapped by prophecy. And the world of Dune is a place where perception alters reality, where hallucinogenic drugs unlock time, and where human evolution itself has become a spiritual journey. At this level, the stories rely on science that could be seen as realistic, but they're also so highly speculative that they could just as much have been in a fantasy story. As in the case of Dune, the world has become so futuristic that it has also started to feel ancient in its own unique ways. And the stories here at level 9 might be just as interested in how humans build myths and beliefs as it is in the technology itself. Another fascinating example here at level 9 is the Broken Empire trilogy by Mark Lawrence. Now at first glance, this very much reads like a grim, dark fantasy. A brutal empire, a ruthless anti-hero, a lot of ancient ruins, and relics of a lost golden age. But gradually you realize that this world is actually post-apocalyptic science fiction set long after the fall of our civilization. In the story, the castles, the magic and the demons and the sorcery, they're just echoes of nuclear weapons, AI systems and forgotten technologies. It's absolutely fascinating. So my question now is, what happens when we move on to the final level where the concepts in the novels are so wild and, may I say, fantastical, that it's actually hard to place what is even happening in the story? Welcome to level 10, science fiction becomes fantasy. So this is it, the final level, the deep end. Level 10, where science fiction becomes a philosophical puzzle or a cosmic riddle with no clear answer. And it's not just about what's happening in the story, but it's also about whether the story itself is real, reliable, or even understandable. And what is so super fascinating with these types of stories is that the sci-fi itself is starting to look a lot like fantasy due to how unrealistic and speculative it has become. And you might have noticed something interesting here. If level 1 are sci-fi stories with almost nothing fantastical about them, level 10 are stories that are almost pure fantasy. Take A True Story by Lucian of Samosata, which was written in the 2nd century and is often considered the first piece of science fiction ever. This story features moon people, interstellar wars, and travelers swallowed by giant cosmic whales. But the question is the story satire or allegory or fantasy or science fiction? I mean, this story is layered with irony that even today scholars will argue about what it's actually trying to say, and that is why this story belongs to level 10. Another example could be The Shadow Out of Time by H.P. Lovecraft, a book I read in May. Now this story is wild. This story is about a man's consciousness that is swapped with a member of the great race of Yeeth, an ancient alien species that records the entire history of every civilization in the universe. Now in the story, he glimpses unthinkable timelines, impossible architecture, and truths about reality that drive him towards madness. And the most terrifying part, he can't even prove any of it happened, but he knows it did. Now actually, a lot of Lovecraft could actually potentially fit into level 10 since it is so weird. I've also been told that the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, and again other stories by Lovecraft, do very much fit into level 10. So this is the level where reality is often simulation or a recursive loop, or maybe just a story being told by a being we can't comprehend. And often we'll see language starting to fall apart, or identity will blur, and time stops behaving the way it should. And by the end of the book, you're not really sure what the story was really about. But yeah, if you want more deep dives like this one, check out my full video on the 3-body problem.